Welcome in, everybody, to the Full Time Fantasy Podcast. I am your host, Billy Musio, and I'm joined by Jody Smith, my co host. As always, tonight we're going to be running through our wide receiver sleepers and our fade lists. And Jody has just finished his projections. I have not finished mine, but he has finished his. He's got the calculation started. Jody, why don't you walk me through some of your projections right now and tell me any big names, any big surprises on your projection sheet?
Well, yeah, the first thing I want to say about projections is, and I tweeted this yesterday, is that if you're, up and coming analyst or you just want to get better at fantasy football, whatever, people that write their own projections before the season and in season, people that are getting those numbers weekly and adjusting them and looking at things, those are the people who typically and generally are successful, more successful in these accuracy contests and rankings, because when you take the time to actually dig through every game, every player, all the depth charts and all that, it just gives you such an advantage. And just by tracking things, you're seeing trends like snap rate increases, target rate increases, and all this kind of stuff. It's labor intensive. We here at Full Time, we have a system in place, but there's been some glitches. I just decided this weekend to bypass it, go back a little old school, and to just enter them all myself. And Billy, you and I just decided let's stay busy, let's stay proactive and get it done. Yeah, there's a lot of surprises. We'll talk about some of the main wide receiver ones here in a few minutes, but we talked right before we went on air, Billy. You and I have to actually get in there and do a little rating summit, because it's just one person's, opinion. I'm looking at algorithms and then I'm going with my own rankings and my own opinions and whatnot. And I need you, a person who is looking at things differently. You're looking at things from, a high stakes FFWC perspective, which, by the way, looking at FFWC ADP, it's spot on. I mean, it's really, really good. Of all the ADP lists out there, I personally think FFWC is probably the best so far early on that I've seen. And that's probably because you're looking at high stakes, smart people that are putting serious time and research and money into this and want to get good at it. So the ADP is a little different than what you're seeing out there around the industry and around, more standard scoring and formats. But, kudos to all the time that you and the gang have put in, on that side of things. Like I said, they just established a really good ADP, and it was pretty surprising how accurate I thought it came out.
Yeah, and a lot of these drafts too. I mean, Superflex right now has been skewing ADP, of course, because that's been
Yep.
the majority of the drafts. But we just launched the Player Profiler Championship last night. The live draft schedule is released. The Red versus Blue live draft, which is the 10th year and going, is scheduled for the end of the month, and I'll be hosting that with Scott. Drafting live, of course, myself as well. So if you want to join in, I think there's only a few spots left in that draft. I think it's June 24th. Don't quote me on the date, but I think it's the end of the month. 3 or 4 spots left. If you want to hop in, head on over to FFWC, hop in the lobby, and make sure to join the draft. So lots of exciting things happening at FFWC. I'm glad you like the ADP. That is, it is. There's a lot of great drafters.
And another thing you just hit on is, if you're not taking the time to study things, ADP this time of year in particular is really skewed towards dynasty, because you have all these rookie only drafts and people that are completely focused, and it screws up the ADP. You'll see a lot of the rookies trending way higher than they're going to trend around draft time, around mid to late August or early September. So that's another thing to keep in mind. And of course, like you said, Superflex, that really alters things, and it's just different. Somebody's going to come up with a better way of inputting ADP versus standard versus Superflex versus dynasty and whatnot. But there's the $1 million idea.
I feel like you're Clark Kent today. You have the glasses on. You just finished all your projections, busting through them.
Yeah, well, I'm not feeling like Superman right now. I feel more like Clark. But yeah, I just had a problem with my contacts. It was really bothering me. So I went a little old school. But yeah, I mean, like I said, I started on the projections this weekend because we just got, we needed to move forward because you got to have projections for everything else to fall in place. So, yeah, it's done. And you and I will get it. We'll tighten it up this weekend. And I think by the latter part of this weekend, that should be good to go.
Awesome. I'm excited to do it. Excited to jump in with you. I'm behind, so I will catch up. But let's hop into our wide receiver sleepers and fades. Why don't you kick off with your first wide receiver that you are higher on than consensus?
Well, like I was saying, I think we're going to be talking, I think, FFWC ADP. And because at this point, we're both on the board here that it's probably the best ADP that I've seen out there. And going with just my own personal views and my own opinions and what my expectations, it feels like Treylon Burks at wide receiver 41 is a screaming value to me. I think we've all expected that he's going to walk right into the AJ Brown role for the Titans, and lo and behold, that's the guy that you saw most often comped to Burks was AJ Brown. Maybe not quite that explosive, but when it comes to the size and the speed profile, that's what a lot of people were saying. Well, Brown, even though he was, he missed some time here and there, he still averaged 105 targets in 27 games in the last 2 years. So he missed 3 games, and he missed 3 games in both years. We expanded to 17 last year. I'm looking at Ryan Tannehill. In his time with the Tennessee, he's averaging 472 pass attempts in his 3 seasons there. So just a modest, I think, estimate for Burks, who has a wide open path. He's going to be their number 1 receiver right from the go. He'll split time with Robert Woods on the perimeters, but he's going to be the go-to guy. A 15% target share at 472 attempts gets you at 70 targets, which, that's okay. But a 20% target share, which is more likely what you're going to see with the number 1 receiver, that gets you at 94 targets. So a 94 target role, like I said, AJ Brown was getting 105, so it's in the same ballpark and all that. And at wide receiver 41, listen, you're talking about a potential explosive rookie who should be getting 90, 80, 100 targets, somewhere in that range, which is going to get you around wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 value. But when you include the speed, the size per runner, Tennessee's schedule, he's got number 1 receiver potential. I think I have Burks significantly higher in my projection. So to me, that's a screaming value all the way down at wide receiver 41. I have him more like a top 30 guy right now.
I think it is good value. We have talked about it time and time again about the vacated targets. I think he's been on our list 2 or 3 times in discussions that we've had either on and off the show. And I think, even though it is a low volume passing offense, you hit the hammer on the nail. It's still a wide receiver 1 role. And whether that is a low volume or a high volume offense or high volume passing offense, they're still going to have significant share in the piece of the pie. And that being said, when you have 336 plus targets that are available, there's a lot to go around, and Burks is going to eat. So I like the pick. I've been actively targeting him ever since I did that the vacated targets chart in drafts, because I agree his value was there, and I said, hey, he's going to really have to suck in order for it not to pay off, and I'm going to bank on him actually being good at football and making sure that he's going to be succeeding, and I think that's what's going to happen. So I love the call for Burks. I think it's a good one. My first one is going to be DJ Chark. Right now, he's going as wide receiver 59 in FFWC. This one, to me, is a screaming value. I mean, we've seen his upside. So injury is a concern with him. He's had a lot of injuries through his career so far in the NFL. But looking back to 2019 is when he finished playing 15 games, so nearly the full season. And in that year, he finished as wide receiver 17. And you look at his metrics across the board: wide receiver 20 in air yards, wide receiver 15 in red zone targets, right? That's where he's been utilized a lot. Wide receiver 3 in end zone targets. The difference is he's being targeted in the end zone itself. He saw a 23.9% target share that year. And then here he is in the Lions. He slides into that similar role, and he's probably going to be that primary red zone target outside Hawkinson. So I can see him returning to form. And even if he is, not necessarily going to be quite that good, like wide receiver 17 is good, right? Really good at football. And so Whether he performs at that level, that's to be seen. But even if he comes in as wide receiver 30 or 35, which is all within the realm of possibilities with someone that has that talent and that size and that speed, I think it's going to be a great return on investment when you're getting him as wide receiver 59 in drafts.
I can say I just looked at my projections. He is significantly higher than 50. He's than 59. He's high. He's in the top 50. I know we got to tweak it. We got to look at things. So you're gaining more than 10 spots of positive traction there at that point. But let me ask you, Billy, as a guy who has kind of said that you feel like Jared Goff is a really nice value this year, at least, or maybe even potentially a really, really cheap super flex option as your QB2. How many Chark Goff stacks do you have out there? And do you feel like that's an approach that you're happy with?
Yeah, it's more of a best ball approach than it is for me redraft
Right.
at this point, just because I don't have to
Of course.
worry about, hitting the start button every week. And so, when you're able to get Goff as wide receiver 25 and then turn around and late in drafts get Chark at wide receiver 59, like I own a lot of it. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I'm going to say it's probably a top 3 or top 4 most owned stack that I have in drafts so far. Number 1 probably being Fields, Mooney, and Fields and Kmet.
Yeah, we're on the same page on all three of those guys.
All right, who's your player 2?
Well, okay, so we talked a little bit before the air, and I saw this ADP it screams like it's too low. So maybe this is more of a redraft type of thing. But I can't figure out why Adam Thielen is going so low, because the guy's just been so consistent. He's FFWC wide receiver 36, but yet. So last year before he got hurt, in terms of fantasy points per game, he was wide receiver 16. Now I know he's 31 now, so he's going to turn 32 during the season. But still, the guy's consistent role. He's got 24 touchdowns in the last 2 seasons. He's scored 9+ touchdowns in 3 of the last 4 seasons. And then you look at some of the other factors. He's got a stable quarterback. We've talked about Kirk Cousins multiple times. Kirk Cousins was one of my must-have value quarterbacks, because it feels like every year, ADP wise, we want to get Kirk Cousins down at wide receiver 15 or 16, but yet here he is pumping up another top 10 fantasy season. Cousins is averaging over 4,100 passing yards and 32 touchdown passes per year since he's been in Minnesota. And clearly he's got that rapport with Thielen in the red zone. I don't expect that's going to slow down anytime soon. And then, I'm looking at the coaching, and I'm kind of interested here with Kevin O'Connell. If anything, not only I mentioned stable as in Kirk Cousins, but if anything, maybe it starts actually trending up. In this last couple seasons as the offensive coordinator with Sean McVay, who was his main influence, Rams had consecutive top 10 offenses overall. Now, how much of that credit does O'Connell get versus Sean McVay? We'll see, but he's walking into a pretty good situation with a well above average, and in our stakes, a very good fantasy quarterback and 2 really, really good starting wide receivers. So I don't have any problems with an ADP at wide receiver 36. I'd be really happy if I were able to go a little robust running back early in a draft, and I was able to somehow get this guy as my wide receiver 3. I'd see it as a huge win.
Yeah, he is going really late in drafts. And I mean, the upside is there. You have to look at the only thing that kind of scares me is he has consistently kind of tapered off at the tail end of the last couple seasons. And I think that the age cliff is approaching, whether it's here, I think that's the concern and why he's been falling in drafts. But I agree with you. I mean, he has been a touchdown monster, right? He has just been super consistent in the red zone, which has really boosted his PPR points. And you look at who he has opposite of him with Justin Jefferson, and he doesn't have to take on the number 1 cornerback. So that's a benefit for Adam Thielen as well in drafts. So I think when you consider it all, I think that he is going too late in drafts. I own a bit of him, not a lot, because I typically have been stacking the Jefferson with Cousins and not as much Thielen, and I'll get a couple where I have them mixed in, but I seem to be kind of targeting running back in those rounds as I typically build either hero or zero running back in those drafts, and running back seems to be pushed down this year, and that's where I've been kind of selecting him, but I do have quite a bit of Thielen as well. There was a statistics that kind of showed with Adam Thielen, and it was, I think Dwayne McFarland was the one who messaged it out, and it says Cousins, if any, for him in the red zone has buffered points per game 20%, 50%, 24%, 26%. Wide receiver one average is 27%. So he is being heavily targeted in the end zone. So I think that's what's been keeping his fantasy points at bay. My second one, and this one's deep. This one's real deep. Like all the way down draft boards. Like we're talking wide receiver 96 in FFWC drafts. And I think this will adjust. It'll correct. And right now, as it stands today, he is the wide receiver 2 for the Ravens, and that's Devin Duvernay. You look at his opportunity that he is stepping into, and he's stepping into, that major significant target share for this team. Yes, it's a run-first team, but still the number 2 role in the wide receiver position for the team. He was wide receiver 30 in true catch rate last year, wide receiver 8 in contested catch rate at 57.1. Wide receiver 57 in red zone targets, 54 in end zone targets. That's not great. But then versus ADP as wide receiver 96, that's significantly better than where he's being drafted at. I mean, you look at those statistics and say, oh, they're not that promising or they're not that shiny, right? But he did all that with a 7.5% target share. And you look at this year, 2022, with an increased role. I'm curious what your projections have him for, how many targets and what percentage. We'll get to that in a second. But with an increased role, I expect a pretty damn good year from Devin Duvernay, who's going to be seeing a lot more of the field. What do your projections say?
They're pretty modest, but you're right in the sense of that it feels like he's got a pretty clear path of roles. My concern with Baltimore is only how pass heavy are they going to stay versus, I know what we saw last year, but that was more of a system of all their running backs were deemed up. Let me just say this about your boy, Devin Duvernay. I absolutely loved him. I drafted him everywhere in 2020 because, well, not only just because he was a Longhorn. I'm looking at my old tweet. So I tweeted, he's one of my favorite late round picks in Dynasty and redraft. He had 2 drops and 125 targets. And this is at Texas, of course. He was 3rd in the nation with 17 broken tackles. And he led all NCAA wide receivers with 372 yards after contact. He was 4th with 711 yards after contact. And he was 2nd in the country in 102 catches that year. And back then, Willie Snead was on a 1-year contract. But again, he's probably ideally slotted in as their slot guy. But again, it's that looking back at Texas, and hopefully it carries over when more opportunities come up. He's still kind of an incomplete right now because he hasn't had a lot of opportunities. If he gets them, the film showed a kid that is going to be able to make a lot of plays downfield, break some tackles, and all that. He just needs the opportunity. So, and he's basically free. Wide receiver, what'd you say, 96?
Wide receiver 96.
So he's going undrafted in a significant portion of drafts. And at that point, like I said, you're looking at round 18, round 20. I mean, there's no negative at all to trying to put a guy like that on your roster because, hey, he could be their wide receiver 2. He might be their wide receiver 3. But right now, it's pretty apparent that he's got a top 3 role locked in.
And you look at, I mean, he's got speed. Like, people forget how fast he is. Like, 4.3940. Like, that's fast. That's really fast. So they're going to be able to get creative with him, right?
Well, my dynasty teams want you to be right, buddy. Like I said, I drafted him like everywhere.
And for a slot guy, I mean, his contested catch rate is amazing for a slot guy, right? 57.1%. Like, that's amazing. That's great. So I think this is going to add a different element to the Ravens offense, and they're going to, of course, have Bateman as well. But Mark Andrews, of course, is the clear-cut number 1 in this offense, regardless of tight end, wide receiver. It doesn't matter. He's the number 1, right? So Duvernay is like the 3rd pass option, but still the wide receiver 2. All right, I have a bonus, and I'm going to throw this in here. And I know he's not necessarily a sleeper, but he's going to outperform ADP, and we have talked about him left and right, up and down. I can't get enough of him this year. That's why I had to throw him in this list. And it's Darnell Mooney. Everyone knows I was going to add him in here. Wide receiver 27 in FFWC drafts right now. Last year, he was wide receiver 11 in targets, 140 on the season last year. Wide receiver 7 in target separation. And that's what I love to see. Like, people who win separation are players who are going to consistently get the ball, because when their quarterback is able to see clear daylight between the defender and him, like, they're going to throw the ball. And that's why Darnell Mooney has been successful in his limited, role, or I should say in his limited stint in the NFL so far, because he's able to get target separation. You look at his other metrics: wide receiver 25 in end zone targets, wide receiver 20 in air yards per game, wide receiver 24 in yards per route run. And you look at what they added. They didn't really add much in the draft. They added, Velus Jones, the only draft pick they spent on a wide receiver, or any pass catchers at that. They've added a ton of scrubs in the free agency, and then 7 undrafted rookie free agents at wide receiver. So you look at chemistry, and him and Fields show a lot of chemistry down the stretch. So I'm very high on Darnell Mooney. Everybody knows this. I had to throw him in the list. Wanted to make sure he made it, and I'm going to continue to bang the table. I want more Mooney. I do.
And another key, and this is a guy I think, I won't get into any of the stats, but I think another screaming value is Allen Robinson is no longer in Chicago. And you can argue about how poorly used he was last year, or that that his target share wasn't that great in and out of the lineup and whatnot. But again, you're talking about a really talented player gone from the lineup. It feels like, if anything, even more reliance on our guy Mooney. And anyway, like I said, Allen Robinson, I feel like is a value. He came up probably too high in my projections. Billy, you're going to have to talk me off that ledge. And another guy, I won't say anything about it, but Tyler Lockett. It feels like going at wide receiver 38. I don't know. It feels like a little low for me.
We have a couple questions here. First is by Kev. Kev, thanks for always being here. We appreciate your loyalty to the show. Burks or London for you, Jody?
Drake London's going to come up probably higher projections wise, but both of them are going to be in the same range. I think overall, Drake London probably is a more complete receiver. I feel like in that offense, you're looking at the Falcons, who are going to win 2 games, 4 games, whatever. You're going to see a lot more pass attempts, so he's probably going to get more targets versus Burks. And London also has plenty of the speed and size to be able to, some of the explosive potential that Burks has. But I feel like London's probably your safer option slightly when it comes to a more consistent and a larger target share over the season in that offense. But if you're looking to, gamble, you're going for the upside, then Burks is probably your guy.
Yeah, I'm going to lean London here as well. I just like the size, 6'4", 213 pounds. I think you hit the hammer on the nail. You're going to have a little bit more pass attempts on the season. And you look at drafts, FFWC has it the same way. So FFWC, Drake London, wide receiver 40. Treylon Burks, wide receiver 41, neck and neck there. So consensus is also agreeing with that as well. So always nice to be able to kind of confirm that with ADP. Jose has a question here. Which rookie wide receiver is most likely to disappoint in 2022?
Most likely disappointment out of the rookie receivers? I'll have to pull up my list all of a sudden. Billy, you got a name in mind?
I'm going to say Chris Olave.
Olave, ooh, that's a good one, man, because I can't stand Jameis Winston this year. And it's not – we talked, I think, about him maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, but there's so many red flags with Jameis Winston. And I don't even know if Winston's going to finish their season, even if he stays healthy for 16 games. So that's a pretty good call because, like I said, I don't want anything to do with Winston. I don't feel confident that he's going to be I don't even like the potential of having him as my super flex quarterback too. That's how low I am on Winston. So yeah, I mean, it'll be hard for him to support, what's Olave going to be at best third on the team in targets? It's going to be behind Michael Thomas if he plays, and Landry most likely. So
yeah, and that's my reasoning exactly. Like you look at other receivers that are going in this area. Olave is going as wide receiver 44. I mean, he's going right behind Treylon Burks, right behind Drake London, who are the clear number 1/1B maybe on their teams. And Olave is arguably the third best wide receiver on the team this year. I mean, he's talented and he's going to eventually take over this role, but I don't think 2022 is going to be the year. I mean, when they added Olave for me kind of that knocks him down a peg. And of course, this is all dependent on Michael Thomas playing, and it's also dependent upon Alvin Kamara, because Alvin Kamara avoids suspension, and next thing you know, he's involved in the passing game as well. So Olave is now the fourth option in the passing game with Kamara on the field. So I just think at wide receiver 44, I have a lot of concerns with Chris Olave.
Just to pigeonhole off that. What did I say? Pigeonhole? Dovetail. Got my bird analogies wrong. What about Garrett Wilson as a rookie, who's gonna probably be a little bit of a disappointment this year? I just still don't have a lot of confidence in Zach Wilson, so it's hard for me right now to envision Wilson with Breece Hall in the lineup taking plenty of touches away. It's hard to envision Wilson, in my view, getting enough targets behind Elijah Moore, who I would much rather have. So as much as I like Wilson overall as a talent, he might be based on the hype, where his ADP is. It started out, I don't know where it is right now, but that might be a guy that disappoints a little bit too.
Garrett Wilson, wide receiver 46 at FFWC, so around the same ballpark. I like Wilson a little bit more, I think, than you may, just because I think he was my wide receiver 1 pre NFL draft. Landing spot, of course, knocks him down a peg a bit, but in terms of talent, he's exceptionally talented, and I love what he is able to do on the field, and so I think that's going to be enough for me to keep him up there. I do have some concerns just because it is the Jets, but I feel like the Jets may kind of come over that hump this year and start to see some sunshine on the other side of the mountain.
You're just sucking up to the boss.
No, I think they had a good draft, and they had a great draft, and Robert Saleh's in year 2 now, and I don't know, he's a Niner guy, man. I like my Niners, but I think in general, I feel like this team is actually kind of coming around, and I feel like I've said it before about the Jets, but I really do feel like 2022 they're going to be better. Well, speaking of players that we're hoping are going to be better, who is on your fade list? Who's your first player?
I'm probably fading Deebo Samuel this year at wide receiver 6. Now, I know that was your boy last year, Billy. You won an enormous amount of your lineups because you had put him in the same category as Ayuk, so you were took plenty of Samuel shares, and of course he came out of nowhere. But first off, he's at a contract impasse with the club right now, which is never a good sign. It doesn't sound like they're going to be necessarily in any hurry to get him playing anytime. So then you become concerned. I mean, how long is this gonna last? Is this gonna drag out? Is he gonna miss the entire preseason? If he shows up before week 1, is he gonna be in shape? Could it drag out in the regular season? Probably not. I mean, I'm optimistic that things will get done and that won't even be an issue at all. But another thing that concerns me about Deebo is the transition to Trey Lance. Now, I looked at it in the 2 starts that Lance had with Deebo. Deebo caught 3 of 9 targets for 58 yards in week 5, and he caught 3 of 6 targets for 63 yards and 1 touchdown in week 17. Not a lot of volume there. Most of his big games obviously came with Jimmy Garoppolo under center. With Trey Lance taking over, we don't know how often he's going to target, but we do know that Trey Lance is clearly more of likely to take off and run with the ball than Jimmy G was. So those potentially take little touches away from Deebo. And, if anything, aren't teams going to be a little more ready for that? I mean, surely towards the end of the year, they still weren't stopping it, but with an entire offseason to game plan and be ready for those little gimmick plays, to break down film and maybe to find some nuances in the routes and the way things are lined up, teams might be a little more wary of, being able to focus and figure out how to stop him as a runner. And the last thing with San Francisco, looking at full-time's 2022 strength of schedule for opponents. Wide receivers, 26th for San Francisco this year. So they face a pretty difficult schedule overall for wide receivers. So I feel like at wide receiver 6, you're having to spend an early second round pick on Debo, I get the appeal there, but it feels to me like we're drafting him at where he finished last year, and I have a hard time seeing him being able to replicate those numbers once again. So to me, he's a guy I would rather see maybe around a wide receiver 10 or 11, which of course never happens, but that's about where he was in my projection. So I'm going to stay, firm with that. And I'm just not going to invest an early to mid second round pick on this guy.
I hate to say it, but I've been fading Debo too. As much as I had him last year, like ADP is just skyrocketed, and you hit a lot of talking points that I would have hit with him. The other piece I want to mention for folks listening is that Debo has expressed his concern for his hybrid role, and he does not want to play that hybrid role anymore. And a lot of Debo's touchdowns or efficiencies or fantasy points came from his work on the ground, running the ball from the backfield. And so if you remove that out of the equation, you're limiting his upside with his fantasy points. And if he's strictly being used as a wide receiver, especially in an offense like you just said, it's going to have a little bit less volume with Trey Lance at helm. So I fully agree. I've actually been drafting more Ayuk this year, so they've swapped in my draft just because of where ADP is at. And I'm always a big fan of taking the latter ADP if you have some question marks with the first. But I agree. Debo is a huge fade for me. I mean, in the beginning of drafts, he was going at like the 111 to like 2.3, 2.4. And then when the contract stuff happened, he started sliding into the end of 2, the beginning of 3. And even there, it's a little rich for my blood, that 2-3 turn. And I mean, if he slips in at the end of 3rd, I'll probably start taking him. But right now, second, I just can't do it. So I agree. My first fade is going to be Jaylen Waddle. I mean, he's going as wide receiver 13 in FFWC drafts. And you look at his metrics, and yes, he's been electric and had, a huge target share for this offense, but they just added Tyreek Hill. They added Chase Edmonds, who's also a pass-catching back. They have Gesicki still there. They brought in Wilson. Like, there's a lot of moving pieces. They have a new coach with McDaniels coming in from the 49ers, and he'll probably get creative with them, but he's probably going to get creative with Tyreek Hill as well. So there's a lot of concerns for Jaylen Waddle being drafted as wide receiver 13. And then you look at metrics: wide receiver 40 in yards per route run, wide receiver 23 in red zone targets, wide receiver 65 in end zone targets, wide receiver 51 in fantasy points per target, wide receiver 78 in average distance of target, wide receiver 82 in air yards per reception. So those two metrics tell me he's 100% reliant on yards after the catch right now, because they're just peppering him with these short to intermediate routes. And we've seen that in game film as well. And then on top of what you said, using the full-time fantasy strength of schedule, sorting it by wide receivers, weeks 1 through 17, guess who's at the bottom of the list? Miami. 32nd, the toughest strength of schedule for wide receivers for the season. And if you look at just the shootout schedule, so weeks 15 through 17, Miami, number 32, on the bottom again. Oof. So when the money counts as well throughout the season, the toughest wide receiver schedule in the league. So I'm fading Jaylen Waddle.
Yeah, not to mention he's not. I mean, you did hit on this, but he's not going to get anywhere near the volume that he got last year. You got an improved running game in Miami. You got Tyreek Hill. You've got Cedric Wilson. You've got a much better supporting cast that are going to take those opportunities that he was pretty much all they had in town last year. So he's going to. There's nowhere to go with there's just hardly anywhere to go but down volume wise for him. So I mean, correct. Still a guy I love in Dynasty, but overall, yeah, I agree. I'll be fading him pretty significantly at where he is right now.
All right, give me your last wide receiver fade for the night.
This is not egregious or anything, but it feels like Mike Williams, peaked last year. You look at, he was averaging 10.7 PPR points a game the previous 3 years. Jumps up to 15.3 last year in a contract year, which is always a concern for me, because you have to wonder, okay, he was able to secure the contract he wanted. So is the effort going to slide? Is he going to be content with that? Love the quarterback, love the offense in general. And the fact that, he's started to mesh with Justin Herbert, obviously his numbers are going to go up versus what they were with Phillip Rivers, but still, he jumped from 85 targets previously to 129 last year. Just such a huge. Uh, it just reeks of a guy who like peaked to secure that contract. It's a 1 year wonder type thing. He's not like I said. He's only hit 10 touchdowns once in his whole career, and that was in 2018. And he's peppered. I love that word. With a bunch of end zone and red zone targets. Like last year, I think he was third in the league in end zone targets, but yet we still see pretty modest touchdown numbers. I believe he scored 9 last year. So it makes you wonder, like with a guy that size, he should be better in contested catch situations. But my initial projections, I actually had him down at wide receiver 30. Now, obviously, Billy will get together. We'll talk about that. You're telling me his contested catch rate he's 11.
Wide receiver 11.
Well, maybe he's not getting them in the end zone though, because he clearly he's not. Like I said, he was third in the league in end zone targets, but 9 touchdowns. Again, I had him right around wide receiver 30 in projections. He's a guy, I'm okay with as wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3, but at an ADP of wide receiver 22, it's a little high for me. It's just someone who, I didn't want to come up with all these mid and lower level guys. It's just I wanted to find a guy who was a little more fantasy relevant. So he's just not someone that I'll be going out of my way to draft this year.
Oh, man. I wanted to do this. You're talking the whole time because I've been drafting so much of him. I love Mike Williams.
We need to disagree on some things. So tell me.
So I think that we're starting to see a change of guard in the wide receiver 1 role here for the Chargers. And Keenan Allen had one of his least productive years last year, where Mike Williams had one of his most productive years. And what happened was new system as well, the Lombardi system, where Mike Williams' role in a Lombardi system is what thrives. Hence why he had such a great year last year. So I mentioned the contested catch rate is wide receiver 11, but you look at where he's being utilized more now, and it is in the red zone, and this is where he should be utilized more. But wide receiver 8 in red zone targets is 23. Wide receiver number 3, tied with Mike Evans in end zone targets. And then you look at like his fantasy points per target, 1.91. which is going to be wide receiver 27, which is not exceptional, but you're talking marginal point differences between that and, number 12. So overall.
So why hasn't he gotten more balls into the end zone throughout his career, though?
So that's the thing. This was the new system. This was the Lombardi system last year. And I think that's what the difference maker was. I think he was being used improperly. He also had injury concerns in the beginning of his career because he's literally the only player in the NFL who can land on his butt and his head simultaneously when he catches the ball. And so he was healthier last year in that new Lombardi system, had another year with Herbert. So I think that was kind of the aha moment for him in his career. I mean, and now coming off contract, and I think that he's going to continue that trajectory in that Lombardi system, and is going to continue to just dominate in my opinion. So I honestly think he's being underdrafted in some areas. So he is going as wide receiver. Where is
22?
Is it 22? Yeah, wide receiver 22. But I mean, I'd like him more than Marquise Brown, who's going as wide receiver 20. I like him a lot more. Who's my next fade guy is Chris Godwin, who's going as wide receiver 21. I mean, I think, honestly, there is the chance that Mike Williams could finish as like a top 15 wide receiver, in my opinion, just because of who his quarterback is, this division that's there, the amount of targets he's getting in the end zone, the red zone, and then excelling in that Lombardi system. So it's nice to disagree at times, but this one, I mean, Mike Williams is probably one of my favorite targets this year. So when I heard you say that, I got sad. I was like, no, because you brought up a lot of good points too.
It's the same way I felt when you just said something bad about my boy, Chris Godwin.
What does Kev say? Williams lays out to the moon and crashes down on his back. Got to learn how to land on his feet. It's very true. He does. So I mentioned my last fade briefly as I was discussing Mike Williams, and that's going to be Chris Godwin. And this one is, I'm not going to go through all the stats because Chris Godwin is an animal, and when he's healthy and on the field, he's one of the best wide receivers in football, especially in this Buccaneers offense with Tom Brady. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you all the different metrics about how good or how bad Chris Godwin is in certain metrics, because it doesn't really matter. He's good at football. That's all you need to know. The only reason I'm fading him is because he's being drafted at wide receiver 21 in FFWC drafts. And he's probably starting the season on the PUP list after tearing his ACL in Week 15 versus the New Orleans Saints. You look back at ACL statistics too, and overall 61.8% of players, 60% of which were wide receivers, returned to play at a mean of 13.6 months. That puts him into January of next year if he were to do that. I don't expect it to be the full 13 months for him. So even if it is more, let's say he crushes that number and he beats it by 30%, that puts him around October. We were talking off air that they have that Week 10 bye. Do they just wait it out and bring him back for that playoff run? I mean, that's a real possibility. I don't think they're going to rush him back. So you're talking about a player who's going to miss the majority of the fantasy season, who's being drafted as wide receiver 21. I just can't do it.
Well, you could argue, and I love Chris Godwin. He's a guy I have almost everywhere, but you can argue that they knew this was coming, and this is why they spent $10 million a year on Russell Gage. But another thing is Godwin also tore his MCL, so that actually makes it even more of a severe knee injury. And it makes a lot of sense. Somebody started this on Twitter a few weeks ago and said, or maybe it was ESPN, I don't know, but they said they fully expect that the Tampa might hold him out until after that late bye, which makes sense. Like, hey, we've got Russell Gage. Let's assume that Gronk comes back. They've got capable Cameron Braid. They can run out some 12 sets. You got a Rashad White, a very good pass catching running back that came in. That's another option that they can play with. So yeah, it could make sense. They could be like, let's just sit back. They should have a pretty cake walk to the NFC South Championship, so they're going to be in the playoffs. They can just save Goblin for that. It's unfortunate. Like I said, he's healthy. He's a wide receiver one.
Absolutely.
He's one of the safest and best players in fantasy healthy. But yeah, it's unfortunate that. So like I said, I've been hyping up Chris Goblin all off season, and then when I dusted off the projections today, I just kept scrolling down and down and down. I couldn't even find him, and I was kind of miffed because you have to take a cautious approach when you're looking at things like projections. But at the same time, when you ride him, you can't necessarily assume injuries. But in his case, it's starting to look inevitable that he's going to miss time.
Yeah, I think it is inevitable, and I think the price at which people are drafting him is just way too high. I think in my 100+ drafts I've done, I have one Chris Godwin share.
Where did he fall for you to get him?
I got him in, I think it was the 4th round, which is not crazy value, but it was a Tampa Bay stack that I was doing, and I missed out on Evans, so I said, hey, I want to get a late round push because I expect him to be there for the playoffs and into the fantasy playoffs, not just the NFL playoffs, which is going to give me that late push. So I made sure to draft Russell Gage. I took a gamble on Cameron Brate late as well, and did a Fournette build as well. So it was a pretty heavy Tampa Bay stack, and I went with the Week 17 correlation that they have with the Panthers. So looked at that and just said, hey, I'm just going to take Godwin here. I don't really like it, but I don't have a single share, so I made sure I grabbed at least one. Well, that is it, folks. That is the show today. We'll be back next week, same time, same place, doing our tight end sleepers and fades as well. I'll be back. There's no grind time tomorrow because I recorded on Sunday with Austin Martin for the Dynasty. So that's the last podcast of the week for me. If you missed the debut yesterday, we launched the Dominator with Matt Kelly, the Podfather, over at Player Profiler, and that is another high-stakes show now dedicated to the FFWC in the partnership with Player Profiler for the Player Profiler Championship for the rebranding of the tournament. So if you have not seen that, head on over to FFWC. Again, live drafts are now underway at the FFWC. Slow drafts are still filling as well. But it's always nice to be in drafting season. June is the start where kind of the masses start to return to the draft field, and I'm excited to get it going. Jody, always a pleasure, buddy. Everybody, have a good night.